Let's grab some alcohol inks and paint some trees. Even if you've never painted a tree before, we're going to paint some trees. Hi everyone, it's Miriam with a Y. Did the intro scare you a little? Did you think, oh no, I can't paint a tree? I bet you can. Actually, I bet you can paint 4 trees. So let's do that. You'll need something to paint on, some inks of your choice, something to hold your inks, a couple of paintbrushes, and some 91 or 99% alcohol. I like 91 for painting sometimes because it keeps the inks wet a little longer. All right, now we have what we need. Let's do this. For tree number 1, I'll be using 3 greens. Piñata lime green, and in another little silicone cup is a mixture of 2 Kielty inks, harvest and forest green. I've got a couple of drops of each in my little cups, and I've added a drop or 2 of isopropyl alcohol just to thin them down a little bit. I'm going to start with a pretty generic tree. This could be a maple, a small oak, a beech. It's up to you. And so are the colors you choose. Just have a lighter and a darker color. With a short-haired small brush, this particular brush is called an angle or angler, I'm literally pouncing fairly random blobs of my lightest green. The reason I'm pouncing rather than just painting out the shape is that pouncing gives the blobs some texture. I'm taking advantage of how alcohol ink loves to make individual little borders for every drop that lands on your surface. So these little borders will wonderfully suggest leaves for us with very little effort. I'm leaving some empty or white spaces between the blobs on purpose. And I'm also not being too perfect about my overall shape. You know, I don't want to make like a ball or a perfect triangle, but I'm just going for, you know, an ovally shape, sort of, kind of, whatever shape your tree should have. Next, I switch over to my darker green, and I'm doing the same thing in order to add a sense of shading here and there. I don't want to add the darker green just to the bottom of the tree because on a real tree you'd see highlights and shadows throughout the tree depending on which parts were exposed to the sun. Now you can actually add a third, even darker color if you choose. I'm just not going to here because this video would just be endless. But I think you get the idea. Adding darker color here and there gives the tree more dimension, and I encourage you to play around with that. Before calling the top done, I'm adding some extra little blobs around the periphery to fluff out the tree a bit. Now let's give this bunch of leaves a support system. For our first tree, I'm just using 1 brown ink and a fine point liner brush. I've chosen a fine point brush so that I can gradually widen my tree trunk without too much fear of it blooming and, you know, getting away from me, since this brush really can't hold that much ink anyway. I'm just quickly making a trunk-like shape for now. And then, remember those white spaces we left before? Well, in them, I'm adding little snippets of branches that would be visible periodically when you look at the top of a tree. These little additions do a lot for making this look all the more tree-like. So rather than just having a bunch of green at the top, throw in a little branch here and there, It really, really fleshes out your tree nicely. Then I go back and start enlarging the trunk, making it thicker and less of one flat color. And I do that just by occasionally taking ink straight from the bottle. And by doing that, I can get a darker value of the brown as opposed to the slightly thinned ink that I have in the little cup. To lighten one side of the trunk more, I can literally just paint on the brown with straight isopropyl alcohol. But I've got to be careful with this, and I have to keep my brush damp more than wet so that I don't cause the trunk to bloom and kind of widen more than I want. And then, poof, we have our first tree. And to keep it from floating in midair, I drew in a quick line to suggest the ground. All right, let's tackle tree number 2, the white birch. Pretty iconic in the alcohol ink world. Or I suppose it could be an aspen also. You know, they're really hard to tell apart. But, okay, let's just paint a white tree with black marks. Since I'm painting on white, I've got to give this tree some color and shading so that, you know, we can see it. For that, I'm adding a little ochre to my gray to warm that color up a bit. But it's fine to leave the gray as a cooler gray too. That'll work just fine. I'm using a round brush and I'm just painting in a couple of trunks. Birches are sometimes planted in groups, so I'll do 3. But you can do just 1 or 2 or however many you like. I'm using a round brush because it holds more ink and it comes to a really nice point so that I can get some details done with the same brush. Now I'm showing you the brush shapes that I'm using, but use what you have. You do not, absolutely do not have to buy specific brushes to be creative or to make art. So don't ever let not having the tools that you see other people using stop you from having fun in your creative space. And if you do buy brushes, don't spend too much on brushes for alcohol ink because this is not a brush-friendly medium. Alcohol ink will wreak havoc on expensive brushes, so don't use them. All right, now, like with my previous tree trunk, I want to have one side of these trunks be darker too, as well as the underside of any branches that kind of stick out. I'm imagining that the sun is shining down from the upper left of the painting, so that's dictating where my shadows will go. While I'm still using the gray ink, I'm adding in some of the bigger branches, and eventually I throw in a quick line at the bottom to suggest the ground again. And that's just a quick line since this is more of a tree tutorial and not so much of a painting grass tutorial. Now I'm going back to my liner and I'm using black ink for my tiny, delicate little branches. I'm taking ink straight from the bottle. Every now and then you'll see me test the amount of ink on my brush on a paper towel I have off to the side. And I do that so that I don't come at my painting with too much ink at first. For these tiny branches, all that's needed are some scraggly little crooked lines and some other little crooked lines coming off those first crooked lines in kind of Y-type shapes. Try to make these random in orientation and placement. With the same black ink, I'm adding some telltale horizontal bands to the trunks Well, that pretty much makes these birches for sure, because aspens don't have those lines. So these are birches. These are definitely birches. And I'll also add some larger dark spots. When putting in your little branches, have some originate from the front side of the tree, the side that we can see, and also some that must be originating from the back of the tree. And remember that the branches get thinner as they approach their end, so whenever possible, try to taper your crooked little lines. I can add a few more details, but for a quick little painting, we could stop here and have these be trees in winter. But let's make this more of a fall tree and add some leaves. For that, I'm going to use some slightly thinned ochre and my short-haired angle brush again, after cleaning off the green ink that's still on it. Like before, I'm just pouncing here and there to make little leaf blobs, little clumps that, tell our eyes that we're looking at a bunch of leaves. Since it's fall in this painting, let's add some leaves to the ground as well. After a good number of yellow leaves, adding a drop of orange to the ochre gives us a little color variety throughout the tree. Add as many leaves to both the tree and ground as make you happy. It's kind of amazing how little pounces with a paintbrush can really suggest leaves, and it's kind of easy and fun to do too. Try to avoid pouncing on the little black branches as much as possible so that you don't have the black blending into the yellow or the orange, because yeah, that's not quite so awesome. At this stage, also add in some extra clumps of leaves that have no apparent supporting branches. And then, like on the first tree, weave in tiny little branches here and there in the white negative space. And try to be a little logical about the placement of those little branches. Like, think about where would they be starting from? Would it make sense for a branch to be here? That sort of thing. But remember, nothing in nature has to be perfect, because imperfect looks more natural, really. There are like a bunch of boo-boos in this little painting, but guess what? It still looks like birch trees, and I'm betting that yours will too. And now, you've made another type of tree. Now let's go tropical and paint a palm. For this tree, I'll be using just the round brush. I begin by mixing brown and gray ink for my trunk, and I'm opting for a curved, leaning trunk. But you can use the same principles for a straight and upright tree. To keep things consistent, I'll have the source of light be in the upper left for all the paintings. Therefore, I'm starting out by painting a light wash of the color for the trunk, and then I darken the entire top half and the bottom right side of the tree, because that's where the shade would be on this trunk. The top half would be all dark because the leaves, the fronds, would be shading that part of the tree. Using the fine point of the brush, I'm adding in sort of like those little leaf scars that are up and down the length of the trunk. And then I paint in what's called the midribs. That's the name, so that's your piece of trivia for today. The middle part of a palm frond is called a mid-rib. So I'm painting in the mid-ribs for each palm. And when doing this, I kind of be random about the length and the angle and the number. Try to avoid being symmetrical. I mean, unless you want that look for the piece that you're making. To get the first layer of color down, I'm starting with my lightest color. In this particular tree, it's not quite as important what order you put your greens down. So if you want to go darker first and then add some light later, it's probably going to be just fine. I'm just used to going from light to dark. To give each frond its sections or leaflets, there's another little piece of trivia. I'm just quickly flicking the point of my brush away from the midrib in either a downward or a slightly sideways motion, depending on where in the tree I'm painting. So for each little leaflet, I'm doing like a little flick with my brush. And then I switch over to a darker green and repeat. The fun part of this is not having to be perfect again and just playing with the brush. If you don't feel confident right off the bat with this flicking motion, practice doing it on a scrap piece of paper. And remember that you can turn the paper as needed to get the angle you want. As the alcohol that's added in the little silicone cups evaporates, the color of the remaining ink intensifies, which is just perfect for some awesome variation in the greens of the tree. But for the fronds more on the right, I want to intensify and darken the green even more. So a quick way to do that is to add a drop of black to my green. And then it's time to flick that color in. To top off the leaves, I'm adding in some extra little highlights here and there, where the sun would really make the tree almost glow. And then with that done, let's ground the tree. I'm going to do that with a really thinned down version of the brown, just for a little beach. I'll just spread that ink back and forth. And then I'll add a darker line of ink for the tree's shadow, because this tree is really screaming for a shadow. And we're done with this one. Now you can make 3 trees! Time for our last one. We'll go conifer this time. Something on the order of, I don't know, like a Douglas fir, maybe. You can decide what kind of tree it is. This time around, I'm adding a little of the color juniper to my green to give it a hint of blue. I'm starting out with a pale green just to put down like a rough sketch of where everything will go. Then with a darker version of the green, I start putting in short, tiny strokes. Not flicking so much like I did on the palm tree. Some evergreens have branches that aim up. Some have branches that stick out almost parallel to the ground, and others have branches that point down. I'm going with a pointing down type. And another design choice that I'm making is to have a tree with lots of open spaces between the rows of branches. If you'd prefer a fuller tree, just fill in the areas that I left open. Here you see me erasing some patches I didn't like by using a micro brush and just some alcohol. I'm painting on GRAFIX opaque white, so I can go back down to the white easily. Thank goodness. The marks that I'm making with the brush are, like I said, tiny strokes and dabs. Since these trees have needles and not leaves, the goal here is more linear looking marks as opposed to, the rounder, more abstract-y shaped ones that we made by pouncing on trees number 1 and 2. On the sunny side of the tree, I shade just the lower portion of the rows of branches, and then on the shady side, I darken everything. For this trunk, I'll just use a brown and paint it in at the bottom and peeking through in between the rows of branches. There's really no need to worry about shading because sunlight is not likely to hit any of the trunk of this tree. So an even color is probably just fine. A line for our ground and a tiny bit of grass out on the edges where it might grow. And guess what? You can now conquer 4 types of trees, and I know that you can. I'm hoping you're feeling inspired to paint a few trees now. Experiment with color and size and shape. Make some summer trees, some fall trees, I don't know, maybe some alien trees and all funky colors. And then come show them off in my Facebook group. I would love to see them. If you'd like more step-by-step painting tutorials with alcohol ink, let me know in the comments. Let me know what sorts of things you're painting these days or are wanting to paint. When simple paintings like these are finished, they make great images for cards, or if you frame them, they can make lovely gifts or art for your walls. You can seal them with sprays that are safe for alcohol ink, like Kamar varnish, for example. Or you can go the extra mile by mounting your paintings and coating them with resin. All of that is also up to you. Links for everything I used are in the description box, and checking out those links really helps my channel. Huge thanks to my patrons for all that you guys do. Thanks to all of you for watching and sharing this video, and for being my amazing art family. Let your creative natures shine, you guys. See you soon. Bye now.